On Christmas Eve in Midtown Manhattan, a widowed CEO cradled a little girl sleeping on cardboard behind his headquarters, only to find that an old card at Mount Sinai West would reopen the door to a miracle. If stories of healing and second chances touch your heart, consider subscribing and joining us on this journey. The wind swept down West 40th Street in furious gusts, carrying with it the scent of wet snow and exhaust from the traffic struggling along 6th Avenue. New York had not felt so brittle, so cutting, in years. Graham Whitmore drew the collar of his black wool coat higher, the flurries clinging to his graying hair like salt shaken by a careless hand. Bryant Park, only steps away from his company's headquarters, was dressed in holiday lights. Strings of bulbs glowed along the skating rink and kiosks, where vendors had already packed up for the night. Families were hurrying home, their laughter carried away by the storm. Christmas Eve was supposed to sound like bells and music. To Graham, it sounded like silence. He paused in the alley that ran along the side of Whitmore Labs. The security lamp above flickered, buzzing as if fighting the wind. He had just left another boardroom dinner, forced smiles, toasts in his name, and investors who thought they could read the measure of his soul in a quarterly report. He wanted no part of it. The truth was, 3 years after Julia's death, he still carried her absence like a phantom limb. His 8-year-old son Theo was at home with the nanny tonight, too young to understand why his father's eyes often turned to glass when Christmas lights came on. A sound reached him then, so faint that for a moment he thought it was the wind, a child's whisper. "Mommy, I just want to find Mommy." Graham froze. He turned toward the far corner of the alley, where cardboard was stacked against the brick wall like a makeshift bed. Beneath a man's oversized coat, something stirred. He knelt, the snow crunching under his leather shoes. Pulling back the collar of the coat, he saw a girl. She couldn't have been more than 5. Her hair, dark and tangled, stuck to her cheeks. Her lips were blue, her breath shallow and irregular. Small hands, nails tinged violet, clutched the edges of the coat as though it were a fortress against the night. "Ava," she whispered again, not looking at him. "I just want Mommy." His heart cracked open. Graham pressed 2 fingers to the child's neck, searching desperately for the pulse. It was there, thready and slow. The clinical part of his mind supplied the terms: mild to moderate hypothermia, ESI level 2 triage. But the father in him saw only danger, the same kind of danger that had taken Julia from him too soon. He shrugged off his own scarf and wrapped it gently around the child's neck, tucking it close to her chin. He pulled out his phone with one hand, dialing 911, his voice hoarse when he gave the address. "Yes, alley behind Whitmore Labs off 6th Avenue near Bryant Park. A child, female, about 5 years old. Severe cold exposure. She's breathing but lethargic. Please, send EMS immediately." He ended the call, scooping her into his arms. She weighed next to nothing. Her head lolled against his chest, and he could feel the faint heat of her skin fighting against the encroaching cold. "You're safe now, sweetheart," he murmured, his throat tight. "Stay with me." Within minutes, the distant wail of sirens rose over the city noise. Red and blue lights cut through the white curtain of snow as the ambulance backed into the alley. Paramedics rushed out with gear bags, one of them barking vitals as soon as Graham handed the child over. "Temps low, skin cyanotic, O2 sat dipping. Let's go. Bear hugger on board." Graham climbed in without asking permission. No one stopped him. The back doors slammed shut, the vehicle lurched forward, and the city blurred past in streaks of neon. He sat beside the stretcher, holding the child's small hand as the paramedics wrapped her in warming blankets and started warm IV saline. Her eyelids fluttered. She made a sound, fragile and tremulous. Mommy works in hospital. Blue letters, she murmured. Graham leaned closer, struggling to catch the words. Mount Sinai. The name punched through him like a sudden ray of light in a storm. Mount Sinai West was only minutes away. He squeezed her hand. We're going there right now. Hold on, Ava. Hold on. The rest of the ride blurred into clinical commands, the beep of monitors, the hiss of oxygen. Yet for Graham it was something more, an awakening. He had spent years hiding behind wealth, behind an empire of glass and steel while grief gnawed at him from the inside. Tonight, in the broken whisper of a child abandoned to winter, he felt the first crack in that armor. By the time they pulled into the emergency bay at Mount Sinai West, snow was piling high against the curbs. Nurses rushed forward, pushing the stretcher through sliding doors into the emergency department. Warm air enveloped them, the sterile brightness of the hospital swallowing the night. Sir, you'll have to wait outside, a triage nurse said firmly, blocking his way. He opened his mouth to protest, but another voice interrupted, an older nurse with kind eyes. He came in with her. Good Samaritan. Let him stay close until social work arrives. Graham exhaled in gratitude and followed as they wheeled the child into a treatment bay. He stood in the corner, watching as the medical team worked. Warm IV fluids dripping, forced air warming blankets enveloping her small frame, glucose levels checked, a chest X-ray ordered to rule out aspiration pneumonia. The girl stirred again, lips moving. Graham bent closer, though he knew she wasn't speaking to him. Find Mommy, she whispered, the plea trembling between them like a prayer. Graham's hands curled into fists. He had lost one mother before. He could not bear to see another child lose hers. He made a silent vow then, a vow that cut deeper than any corporate contract he had ever signed. I will find your mother. I will not let you go through this alone. Outside the window, snow kept falling over Manhattan, muffling the city's noise in a blanket of white. Inside, under the harsh light of the ER, a man who thought he had nothing left to give found himself holding on to a fragile thread of hope, one tied to a little girl named Ava. Snow clung stubbornly to the corners of Graham's coat as he trailed the stretcher into the bright, humming heart of Mount Sinai West. The emergency department was crowded, as Christmas Eve in Manhattan always was, slip-and-fall injuries from icy sidewalks, chest pains that families couldn't ignore over holiday meals, the lonely who sought a warm bed disguised as triage. But when Ava's stretcher rolled through the sliding doors, time seemed to bend. The triage nurse clipped a pulse oximeter onto the girl's finger. The monitor beeped, displaying a troubling number. SpO2 hovering at 88. Respiratory shallow, core temperature still low, she called. Another nurse, already drawing warm saline into an IV line, added briskly, We'll need forced air warming. Bear hugger on standby. The flurry of movement was both clinical and urgent. Graham stood back, pressed against the wall, his hands tightening and loosening as though to wring away his helplessness. He had sat in countless boardrooms where billions shifted with a word. Here, no title mattered, no empire. Only the fragile thread of a child's breathing did. The ED charge nurse, a woman with silver hair tucked neatly under her cap, turned to him. Sir, you were the one who found her? Yes, he managed, his voice hoarse. Behind Bryant Park, in the alley by my office. She was whispering for her mother. The nurse nodded, jotting a note. We'll need to involve social work. You can stay until they arrive. Are you family? No, I'm not, he admitted, his throat catching. But I couldn't leave her there. The nurse's eyes softened. Good Samaritan, then. That's enough for now. Machines hummed, blankets inflated with warm air around Ava's tiny frame. One paramedic read from the monitor. Core temp climbing, now 95.2. That's good progress. A respiratory therapist leaned over her, adjusting the nasal cannula. Keep the O2 at 2 liters. Watch for hypoventilation. Graham forced himself to absorb the words, clinging to them like markers in a storm. Warm IV saline, 38 to 42 degrees. Check for hypoglycemia. Chest X-ray to rule out aspiration pneumonia. Minutes crawled by. Then, under the cocoon of warmth, the girl stirred. Her eyelids fluttered. She whispered something, a thin thread of sound. The nurse bent down. "Sweetheart, can you say that again?" Her voice, hoarse and broken, carried across the room. "Mommy works here. Blue clothes, Mount Sinai." The staff exchanged glances. One nurse straightened. "We had a Jane Doe admitted to the ICU last night. Middle-aged woman, unconscious. No ID." The words landed like sparks. Graham's chest tightened. Could it be? The charge nurse glanced at him. "Don't get ahead of yourself, sir. We'll need social work to verify." But there may be a connection. Graham's pulse thundered. He leaned closer to Ava, whispering, "We'll find her, sweetheart. We'll find your mom." A tall man in a gray sweater stepped into the bay. "I'm Daniel Ruiz, social worker on call tonight." He carried a tablet and wore an expression both weary and kind, the look of someone who had seen far too many Christmases spent in hospitals. He crouched beside Graham. "You're Mr. Whitmore, correct? The one who found her?" "Yes." Ruiz nodded. "I'll need to get some details for our report. How did you come across her?" Graham recounted the alley, the cardboard, the faint whisper. His words slowed when he reached the part where Ava had said Mount Sinai. Ruiz's brow furrowed. "Interesting. We'll cross-check. For now, she'll remain under our care, and we'll initiate a safety plan until her guardian is confirmed." He tapped notes into his tablet, then looked up. "You don't have to stay, Mr. Whitmore, but you're welcome to. Sometimes the presence of the rescuer helps orient the child." Graham hesitated only a moment. "I'll stay." The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly. Around them, the ER pressed on with its chorus of cries and monitors. Yet in the cocoon of curtains, a quiet settled. Graham pulled a chair closer to the bedside. He watched Ava's chest rise and fall, each breath steadier than the last. "Do you hear that?" the nurse murmured, checking the monitor. "Lungs clearing, no crackles. That's good. We'll keep her on warm fluids and repeat vitals." Graham leaned closer, speaking softly. "You're safe now. You don't have to be cold again." The girl's small fingers twitched beneath the blanket. She seemed to fight between dreams and waking. Then, eyes barely open, she rasped, "Are you... Daddy?" The question pierced him. For a moment, Julia's face swam in his memory. Her eyes the night before she passed, her hand squeezing his as though to anchor him to life. He swallowed. "No, Ava, I'm not your daddy," he said gently, "but I'll help you find your mommy." Her eyelids fell closed again, a tear sliding down her cheek. Hours blurred. Nurses moved in and out. The clock on the wall crept toward midnight. Outside, the city sang with sirens and car horns muffled by snow. But inside, Graham was caught in the slow rhythm of machines and breaths. He remembered Theo at home, likely asleep with the nanny, maybe clutching the old stuffed bear Julia had once sewn a button back onto. His son needed him too. Yet here he was, sitting beside a stranger's child, unwilling to move. When Ruiz returned, his expression was cautious. "We've checked. The Jane Doe upstairs was brought in last night after collapsing in a subway station. Female, early 30s, still unresponsive. No identification, but the description matches what this little one has said. We're running a limited chart review under HIPAA allowances for child safety. It may be her mother. Graham's breath caught. He pressed his palms together, forehead leaning into them. Thank God. Ruiz's voice softened. We'll know more in the morning. For now, Ava's stable. We'll admit her for observation overnight. Graham nodded, exhaustion settling into his bones, yet a strange warmth rising through it. The sense that this night, bleak and bitter as it had begun, carried a thread of destiny. He looked again at the girl curled under the blanket, her breathing now steady, her cheeks slowly regaining color. In her fragile form he saw both pain and promise. He had come to this hospital as a rescuer. He would leave, he knew, as something more. The elevator rose with a muted hum, each floor passing like a beat in Graham's chest. The fluorescent lights overhead were cold, clinical, yet his palms were damp with something that felt too human to belong in this sterile tower. Ava lay asleep 2 floors below, her fragile body cocooned in warmth, her whisper about "Mommy in blue" still echoing in his ears. The ICU was hushed in a different way than the ER. Here the air carried gravity, a silence broken only by the beeping of monitors and the slow rhythm of ventilators. Each sound was a reminder that life hung by wires and tubes, fragile as snow balanced on the edge of a branch. A nurse with tired eyes led him down the corridor. "Bed 7, she said softly. She came in last night. Collapse at a subway platform. No wallet, no ID, just her coat." The sight hit him like a blow. The woman lay pale against the crisp sheets, machines tracing her heartbeat, blood pressure, oxygen levels. Her face, though peaceful, bore the subtle slackness of neurological injury. But Graham's eyes went not to her face first, but to the coat folded on the chair beside the bed. A child's memory could be fogged by fear, but not by love. Ava had clung to that coat, wrapped in its smell, its warmth. Graham reached out, fingers grazing the fabric. The collar still held a faint trace of lavender soap. Claire. The name came unbidden, though he didn't know yet if it was hers. He turned to the nurse. "What's her condition?" The nurse checked the chart. Initial suspicion: ischemic stroke, possibly a transient ischemic attack before collapse. Non-contrast CT showed no hemorrhage. CTA inconclusive due to motion artifact. Onset unknown, so she wasn't a candidate for TPA. We're monitoring closely. NIHSS every 2 hours. Supportive care. Neuroconsult scheduled. Graham absorbed the words, clinging to the protocol like rope. He knew enough to understand what they meant. Her chances depended not on miracles, but on time, vigilance, and the slow patience of healing. The nurse lowered her voice. "She's stable for now, but prognosis is uncertain. You should know. Sometimes patients wake, sometimes they don't." Graham's throat tightened. He stepped closer to the bed, his hand hovering before it finally settled on hers. Her skin was cool, her fingers limp, yet as he touched her, something astonishing happened. Her smallest finger twitched. His breath caught. He leaned down, whispering, "Your daughter is safe. Ava is safe. I found her, and she's warm now. She's waiting for you." The finger twitched again, faint but undeniable. He stayed there longer than he intended, watching her chest rise with the help of the ventilator, listening to the steady blip of the heart monitor. The machines spoke a language of persistence, and in their rhythm he heard something like hope. At one point, Daniel Ruiz, the social worker, appeared at the doorway. "Mr. Whitmore," he said softly. "You should rest. We'll handle the next steps." But Graham shook his head. She responded. Just now, when I spoke of Ava. Ruiz's brows rose. That's good. Reflexes can be complicated, but it's worth noting. I'll inform Neuro. He hesitated, then added, It means something, doesn't it? For her to respond? Ruiz placed a hand on the doorframe. His voice weighted with caution but not cruelty. It means she's still fighting. That's what matters right now. When he left, the room felt heavier with solitude. Graham remained by the bedside, remembering Julia's last hours. Machines surrounding her, his own hand clutching hers, the helplessness that nearly crushed him. He had failed once, in a way that never stopped echoing. He would not fail this child and her mother. He bowed his head, whispering, I promise you, Claire, or whoever you are, I'll find your name. I'll find your life. And I'll keep your daughter safe until you can take her hand again. As the night deepened, the hospital quieted, though never fully. A code announcement in the distance, the rumble of carts in the hallway, the faint murmur of voices from the nurses' station, all reminders that life and death coexisted under one roof. He imagined Ava 2 floors below, curled in a hospital cot, holding onto the scarf he had given her. He imagined Theo at home, perhaps stirring in his sleep, sensing his father's absence. For years, Graham had built walls around himself, convincing everyone, including Theo, that grief had no cracks. But tonight, in this room with a stranger and her silent fight for life, the walls trembled. At some point, a resident came in to update the chart. She adjusted the IV fluids, checked pupillary response, murmured about maintaining cerebral perfusion pressure. Graham caught only fragments, but he caught enough to feel the weight of each word. Every technical detail was another thread in the fragile net keeping this woman alive. When the resident left, Graham pulled the chair closer to the bed. He clasped the woman's hand between both of his forehead bent low. I lost Julia 3 years ago, he whispered. I know what it's like for a child to grow up missing her mother. But Ava doesn't have to. Not if you fight your way back. Silence answered him. Silence. And the faint, miraculous tightening of her fingers around his. It was barely there. A ghost of pressure. But it was enough. By dawn, the snow outside had thickened into a white silence over Manhattan. The city woke slowly, taxis crawling through slush, steam rising from grates. Inside the ICU, light shifted from artificial to natural, casting the room in pale gray morning. A nurse brought him coffee he barely tasted. He hadn't slept, hadn't moved much at all, but he didn't feel weary in the usual way. He felt anchored. Anchored to the fragile pulse beneath his hand, anchored to a promise he hadn't planned to make. When he finally stood, stretching the stiffness from his back, he looked once more at the woman's face. She was nameless still, just Jane Doe on the chart. Yet in his heart, he whispered the name Ava had spoken, Mommy, and felt the weight of its truth. This was no stranger to him anymore. She was a thread tied to his own fractured life, and he would follow it to its end, whatever that end might be. He left the ICU then, not to abandon, but to prepare. Ava would wake and ask for her mother again, and when she did, Graham intended to answer with more than hope. He intended to answer with certainty. The quiet room sat tucked away at the far end of the nursing lounge, a small refuge that seemed designed less for sleep than for surrender. It was no larger than an office, with a fold-out cot pressed against one wall, a thin blanket neatly folded on top, and a lamp whose bulb hummed faintly like a distant lullaby. Graham stood in the doorway, hesitant. He had spent decades in glass towers, in penthouses with views of Central Park, in conference rooms lined with mahogany and silver carafes of coffee. Yet this small, plain space, smelling faintly of antiseptic and starch, felt like the most sacred room he had entered in years. Behind him, Ava clung to the edge of his sleeve, her eyes still glassy with exhaustion. The child had endured too much for one night. The cold, the sirens, the bright flood of the emergency bay. Now, swaddled in a borrowed hospital gown and socks far too big, she looked like a bird shivering in borrowed feathers. "Can she stay here tonight?" Graham asked the nurse softly. The charge nurse considered, then nodded. "Given the circumstances, we'll allow it. Visitor exception. Family-centered care, we call it." She bent to Ava's level, voice gentle. "You're going to sleep right here, sweetheart. Safe and warm." The girl nodded faintly. Her eyes never left Graham's face. When the nurse left, Graham unfolded the cot, spreading the thin blanket. He slipped off his overcoat, placing it over the top to add weight. Then, awkward but tender, he lifted Ava and set her down. Her body sagged into the mattress as though gravity had finally claimed its debt. He pulled the blanket up to her chin. "There we go," he whispered. "Nothing to worry about now." Her small voice rose, fragile. "Will Mommy find me here?" The question cut like glass. Graham sat down beside her, smoothing back her hair. "Yes," he said, steady though his throat burned. "Your mommy is close. She's upstairs, resting. The doctors are helping her. She'll want to see you strong when she wakes." Ava blinked slowly, trusting him with the unquestioning faith only children possess. Graham reached into his leather briefcase. He always carried a book for Theo. Julia had once teased him that bedtime stories were his truest board meetings. Tonight he had The Snowy Day, the classic picture book, its cover softened from years of handling. "Do you want me to read?" he asked. Ava nodded faintly, curling deeper into the blanket. He opened the book, his voice low, resonant. One winter morning, Peter woke up and looked out the window. Snow had fallen during the night. It covered everything as far as he could see. As he read, his voice took on the cadence of memory. He had read these very words to Theo when he was Ava's age, Julia leaning against the door frame, smiling faintly as if storing the moment for eternity. Ava's breathing slowed, her eyelids fluttering shut, yet her small hand reached out, gripping his sleeve. Graham continued reading, his voice softer, until she drifted into the heavy stillness of exhausted sleep. When he stepped into the hallway, the stillness of the night shift pressed around him. A few nurses murmured at the station, their voices carrying the calm competence of those who lived inside crisis. Graham pulled out his phone. The clock glowed, 1:17 a.m. He hesitated before dialing. When the familiar voice of his nanny answered, his chest loosened. "Mr. Whitmore? Is everything okay?" "Yes, Claudia. I'm at Mount Sinai West. How's Theo?" "Asleep. He wanted to wait up, but I told him Santa doesn't come for tired boys." She chuckled softly. "Do you need me to stay later tomorrow?" "Yes, thank you." Graham's voice dropped. Tell him I'll explain in the morning." When he ended the call, he leaned against the cold wall, pressing his forehead to the plaster. The weight of memory pressed in. Julia's final hospital stay, her hand slipping from his, Theo's bewildered eyes when she didn't come home. He had vowed then never to let his children linger in hospital corridors, never to let them breathe the sterile air of waiting rooms filled with unspoken dread. And yet here he was, breaking that vow, not for Theo, but for another man's daughter. The irony cut deep. Yet deeper still was something else, something he hadn't expected. The faint warmth of purpose, of stepping outside the numb circle of his own grief. When he returned to the quiet room, Ava stirred, Her eyes opened just enough to find him in the dim light. "You stayed," she murmured. He sank into the chair beside the cot. "I told you I would." Her small brow furrowed. "Are you going to leave when Mommy comes back?" The air held still. He thought of Theo, of his fear of being replaced, of the way his son's drawings had become full of dark scribbles after Julia's death. Graham had promised himself never to let his child feel abandoned again. "No," he said finally, his voice steady. "I won't leave. Families don't shrink, Ava. They grow. My son Theo is waiting for me at home. He misses his mom, just like you miss yours. But there's enough room in our hearts for everyone who needs it." Ava blinked, her lashes damp. Then she reached under her pillow and pulled out a crumpled scrap of paper. It was a child's drawing. 2 stick figures holding hands, another smaller one between them. She pressed it into his hand. "For you," she whispered, "so you don't forget." His throat closed. He laid the picture gently back beside her, smoothing its wrinkled edges as if it were a contract more binding than any merger he had ever signed. An hour later, he found himself dozing in the chair, his head tipped back, the blanket he had draped over Ava slipping to the floor. A small sound pulled him awake, a whimper, soft and frightened. He leaned forward. "Ava." She trembled, half asleep. "The cold. It was dark. I thought I'd never find the light." Graham gathered her hand into his. "There's always light," he said, the words coming from somewhere deeper than thought. "When it's too dark, you look for people. People are the light." Her small fingers curled tighter around his. Her breathing eased, the whimper fading, and Graham realized that in saying it to her, he had spoken to himself as well. By the time the first gray strands of dawn seeped through the frosted windows, Ava was still asleep, her face peaceful at last. Graham stood, stretching stiff limbs, his overcoat heavy on his shoulders. He looked down at her one last time before leaving to check on the ICU. In her sleep, she shifted slightly, her lips parting in a whisper too soft for the world but clear enough for him. "Daddy Graham." The words stilled him. He did not correct her. Instead, he bent low, brushing a stray curl from her forehead, and whispered back, "I'm here." The hallway leading toward the pediatric wing of Mount Sinai West was quiet, but not silent. Graham's son Theo walked beside Claudia, the nanny, his sneakers squeaking faintly on the polished tile. He was only 8 years old, yet his face carried the serious expression of someone much older, as though he had inherited his father's grief long before childhood should have yielded it. It was Christmas morning. Instead of wrapping paper and hot cocoa, Theo was clutching a backpack stuffed with crayons, a sketch pad, and the old bear his mother had once stitched back together after its stuffing had leaked. Julia's absence clung to him like invisible frost. He had learned to endure it quietly, but inside it still ached like a bruise pressed too often. When Graham saw him turn the corner, his chest loosened. He knelt, arms outstretched. "Theo." The boy allowed himself to be folded into the embrace, his thin arms encircling his father's neck. Graham breathed in the scent of his son's hair, the ordinary warmth of it grounding him after a night of sterile corridors and uncertain hope. But when Theo pulled back, his eyes shifted. Behind Graham, through the partly open door of the quiet room, a small figure stirred in the cot. Ava. Theo's gaze narrowed. "Who is she?" Graham hesitated. "Her name is Ava. I found her last night. She was alone in the snow. She's safe now." Theo's lips pressed into a thin line. "Why is she here? With us?" Later, inside the quiet room, Theo stood by the cot, staring down at the girl who looked impossibly small under the blanket. Ava stirred, blinking awake, her brown eyes sleepy but alert. When they met Theo's, she smiled faintly, as if expecting kindness. "Hi," she whispered. Theo didn't answer right away. He gripped the straps of his backpack, his shoulders squared. "This is our room," he said finally, his voice taut. Ava's smile faltered. She looked at Graham as if for reassurance. "Son," Graham said gently, "this isn't ours. It belongs to the hospital. Ava needed a safe place, so I stayed with her last night." Theo turned to his father, his voice rising. "You stayed with her? On Christmas Eve? What about me? What about us?" The words struck Graham like stones. He saw not defiance, but fear in his son's eyes, the fear of being replaced, of losing what little family he had left. He knelt in front of Theo, gripping his shoulders. "Listen to me. Nothing will ever make me stop being your dad. Nothing. Ava doesn't take that away." Theo's jaw trembled. "But it feels like she does. You look at her like you used to look at me. Like when Mom was still alive." The silence that followed was heavy, a truth Graham hadn't expected but couldn't deny. He drew Theo into his arms, holding him tight. "I know you miss Mom. I do too. But love doesn't shrink when it's shared. Our family is strong enough to help someone else without losing what we already are." Theo buried his face against his father's coat, silent tears soaking the wool. Ava, watching from the cot, shifted uncertainly. She reached under the blanket and pulled out the scrap of paper she had given Graham the night before, the drawing of 2 adults and a child. With careful fingers, she added another figure with a crayon from Theo's bag, then held it out to him. "This is you," she said softly. Theo blinked at the paper. His tears slowed. "Me?" Ava nodded. "Now it's all of us. Nobody gets left out." Graham watched the moment with a lump in his throat. His son's hand hovered, then finally took the paper. He placed it gently beside Ava's pillow, as though acknowledging her fragile claim to belonging. "Thank you," Theo said, the words barely audible but real. Later that morning, Graham and Theo walked together down the hospital corridor. The boy's small hand gripped his father's, tighter than usual. "Dad," Theo whispered, "promise me something. Anything. Promise me that even if you help her, even if she stays for a while, I'll still be your first family." Graham stopped, kneeling again so their eyes met. He cupped his son's face, steady and sure. "You are my first family. You and me, we started this together. No one will ever change that. But sometimes, Theo, family is like light. The more candles you light, the brighter it gets. It doesn't take away from the first flame. It just makes more warmth." Theo's eyes shimmered, uncertain but thoughtful. He pressed the old bear into Graham's hand. "Then maybe she can borrow this, just until her mom wakes up." Graham's chest ached with pride and tenderness. He ruffled his son's hair. "That's more generous than most grown men I know." That afternoon, when Ava stirred awake again, the bear was waiting on her pillow. She hugged it close, her small arms wrapping around it as if she had always known it. Graham glanced at Theo, who pretended not to notice but whose lips twitched with the faintest shadow of a smile. The room felt warmer then, not because of the hospital's heating, but because a bridge had been built between 2 children carrying grief too large for their years. Graham stood watching them, his heart filled with something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not just hope, but the fragile beginnings of harmony. As evening fell, Central Park glowed with holiday lights beyond the hospital windows. Theo sat by the cot, his crayons spread out, sketching clumsy stars and snowflakes. Ava leaned beside him, eyes wide as though stars could be caught on paper. Graham sat in the chair, exhaustion threading through him, but for once it was not the heaviness of despair. It was the weight of love stretched wider, the tentative peace of knowing that wounds, even old ones, could begin to mend when shared. Theo looked up from his drawing, his voice soft. "Dad?" "Yes, son." Theo slipped his small hand into Graham's. "Okay. Maybe our family is big enough." Graham's throat tightened. He closed his fingers around Theo's, then reached to smooth Ava's hair where she leaned sleepily against the cot. For the first time in 3 years, Christmas night did not feel like absence. It felt like the fragile outline of something new, a family being drawn not by chance, but by choice. The ICU was dim that evening, its machines tracing quiet arcs of life. Graham entered with careful steps, his overcoat folded over one arm. Theo and Ava had been left in the quiet room under Claudia's gentle watch. He needed space to think, and more than that, to search. The woman, still Jane Doe on the chart, lay in her bed, monitors humming steadily. Her hair spilled across the pillow, a stark contrast against the pale sheets. Graham sat down in the chair beside her. He had no right to claim connection, yet he felt it all the same. His eyes drifted again to the coat folded on the chair. He remembered the way Ava had clung to it in her sleep, as if the smell of her mother lingered there like an invisible tether. He reached for it now, unfolding the worn fabric. The pockets sagged with age. Something slipped out, a small, weathered card. It fell to the linoleum floor with a whisper. He bent to pick it up, turning it over in his hands. It was a thank you card. The edges were softened, the ink faded from years of careful keeping. His heart stalled as he read the handwriting inside, the loops of the letters instantly recognizable. Julia's handwriting. "To the nurse with the blue gloves who held my hand when fear nearly broke me. You reminded me that I was not alone. With gratitude, Julia Whitmore." Graham's breath caught. He could see it, as clearly as if it were yesterday. Julia in labor with Theo, her hand slick with sweat, her eyes wide with panic. The epidural had faltered, the pain was sharp, and fear even sharper. Amid the whirl of residents and attending physicians, there had been a nurse, calm, steady, wearing blue gloves. She had leaned close, gripping Julia's hand. "You can do this. You're stronger than you know," the nurse had whispered. Julia had squeezed back. Afterward, once Theo was safely born, she had written that card, insisting Graham deliver it personally. And now, years later, it lay in his hand, tucked into the pocket of this woman's coat. He looked at her pale face, the rise and fall of her chest under the ventilator. "It's you," he whispered. "You were there at the beginning of my son's life. And now, somehow, you're here again." He gripped the card so tightly it bent. A strange, powerful tide rose in him. Gratitude, awe, and something like destiny. Daniel Ruiz appeared at the doorway, tablet in hand. "Mr. Whitmore, I wanted to check in. Any change?" Graham turned, holding up the card. His voice trembled. "I know who she is." Daniel frowned. "How?" "This card. My wife wrote it years ago." "She was the nurse, the one with the blue gloves. Her name is Claire Reed." Daniel stepped closer, studying the card. "That would explain Ava's words. We'll confirm through hospital records. But if this is true," he exhaled, "it's extraordinary." Graham nodded, emotion thick in his throat. "She once held my wife together in her most vulnerable moment. And now it's my turn. I'll hold her and her daughter until she's strong again." The night nurse entered, adjusting IV fluids, noting vitals. "She's stable," she murmured, "but recovery is unpredictable. She may need speech and swallow evaluations if she wakes. Physical therapy, occupational therapy. It's a long road. Graham listened, absorbing every detail. He no longer thought in terms of uncertainty. He thought in terms of commitment. When the nurse left, he leaned forward, gripping Claire's hand. You once gave us strength when we were breaking. You don't know me, not really, but I know you. I will not let your little girl lose you, not while I can fight. For a moment, impossibly, her hand seemed to tighten around his. Or perhaps it was only his desperate imagination. Yet it was enough. Later, back in the quiet room, Graham found Theo sketching on the floor while Ava colored beside him. The sight made him pause. Two children bent over paper, crayons scattered like spilled stars. For a brief heartbeat, it felt like home. Did you see her? Ava asked, her voice eager. Graham knelt, brushing her hair back. Yes, sweetheart. I think I know her name now. Claire. Your mommy is Claire Reed. She was a nurse a long time ago. Ava's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. Mommy helped people. I knew it. Theo looked up from his drawing, brow furrowed. Wait, the nurse with the blue gloves? Graham blinked. You remember? Theo nodded solemnly. Mom told me that story once. She said a nurse held her hand when she thought she couldn't go on. She called her an angel. The room fell silent, the weight of connection settling like a mantle. Ava hugged the bear tighter, whispering, That's my mommy. That night, Graham sat awake, unable to rest. His thoughts circled the same point, sharp and relentless. He had lived years wrapped in numbness, avoiding rooms like these, avoiding the vulnerability of caring too much. But now he was pulled into a story larger than himself, threaded by memory, gratitude, and the simple strength of a child's whisper. When dawn light crept through the frosted glass, he made a silent vow. Claire Reed, he whispered into the pale morning, you once held my family together. Now it's my turn. I will not let go of you or your daughter until you can walk out of here with her hand in yours. And for the first time since Julia's passing, Graham Whitmore felt the flicker of something he had thought long gone. Faith, fragile and luminous, like the first candle lit in a darkened chapel. Morning sunlight filtered through the frosted windows of Mount Sinai West, tinting the ICU in a pale wash of silver. Snow still blanketed Manhattan, muffling the usual roar of traffic into a subdued hum. Graham sat in his chair beside the bed, one hand wrapped around Claire's fingers, the other holding the weathered card that had revealed her name. He had not moved all night. Exhaustion carved shadows under his eyes, but his focus remained sharp, anchored to the rise and fall of the ventilator's breath. He had promised her, and Ava, that he would not leave. A gentle knock sounded at the door. A neurologist entered with a resident in tow, their voices measured, their steps quiet. How is she? Graham asked, his tone clipped with urgency. The neurologist checked the monitor. Vitals stable. Core temp normalized overnight. Pupillary response improved. He leaned over, shining a penlight into Claire's eyes. NIHSS score yesterday was 12. Today, let's check. The resident called out numbers softly. Motor response, language, gaze. Graham caught only fragments, but he saw what mattered. A flicker of movement in her eyelids, the twitch of a hand beneath his. Encouraging, the neurologist said. We'll reduce sedation. See if she initiates spontaneous breaths. If all goes well, we can trial extubation this afternoon. Graham's heart pounded. He gripped her hand tighter. You hear that, Claire? You're almost back. By mid-afternoon, the ventilator hissed to a stop, the tube gently withdrawn. Claire coughed, her throat raw, but she breathed on her own. Oxygen by nasal cannula replaced the machine's rhythm. Nurses adjusted monitors, their motions efficient, but to Graham it felt like watching the first rays of sun break through a storm. Her eyelids fluttered. Slowly, painfully, they opened. Her gaze was unfocused at first, swimming in light and shadow. Then her eyes found Graham's. For a moment, confusion clouded them. He leaned forward, voice trembling. "You're safe. You're in the hospital. Ava is here. She's safe, too." The confusion shifted, her brow furrowing as though searching memory. Then her lips moved. The sound was hoarse, barely audible. "Blue gloves." The words pierced Graham like an arrow. He nodded, tears blurring his vision. "Yes, you were the nurse with the blue gloves. You held Julia's hand when Theo was born. You kept us from falling apart." Recognition dawned slowly in her eyes. She studied his face, the lines carved deeper since that day, the grief he carried. Then faintly she whispered, "Whitmore." "Yes," he breathed. "Graham Whitmore. You saved my family once. And last night I found your daughter. She found me." At that moment the door creaked open. Small footsteps padded in. Ava, clutching the bear Theo had lent her, rushed to the bedside. "Mommy!" Her cry was both fragile and fierce, the sound of a child who had carried fear too long. She scrambled onto the chair, leaning over the bed, her little hand brushing her mother's cheek. Claire's lips trembled, her weak arm lifted, fingers brushing Ava's hair. Tears slipped down her cheeks. "Baby, my baby," Ava sobbed, clinging to her mother's hand. "I looked for you. I followed the lights, just like you said, and I found him. Daddy Graham." The room went still. Graham's breath caught. Theo, who had trailed in behind, stiffened at the phrase. Claire's gaze flicked from her daughter to Graham, her lips parting in surprise. He shook his head gently. "She called me that on her own. I didn't correct her." Claire's eyes softened. Weak as she was, a smile flickered through her tears. "Maybe she sees what we can't yet." The neurologist interrupted gently, clearing his throat. "Ms. Reed, we'll need to do a swallow evaluation before you can drink water, and physical therapy will come soon to assess strength. You'll have a long road, but today is a good day." Claire nodded faintly, her voice rasping. "I'll walk it, as long as she's with me." She looked at Ava again, cupping her cheek with trembling fingers. Graham stood back, letting the reunion unfold. He felt both an intruder and a guardian, caught between past and present. Julia's absence still ached within him, but the sight of Ava and Claire together stirred something new. Not replacement, but continuation. A thread of hope winding into his own broken story. Later, when the medical team left, the room fell quiet except for monitors. Ava had fallen asleep curled against her mother's arm, the bear squeezed tight between them. Claire looked up at Graham. Her eyes still glassy but more present than before. "You stayed with her," she whispered. "Yes." His voice was steady. "She was in the snow, freezing. She whispered for you. I couldn't walk away." Claire closed her eyes, tears slipping down her temples. "Thank you. I don't know how." "You don't have to know yet," he interrupted gently. "For now, just heal. I'll make sure she's safe. Both of you are safe." Her gaze lingered on him. "Julia trusted me once. Now it seems I must trust you." Graham swallowed hard. He thought of the card, of Julia's handwriting faded with years. "She would want me to be here," he said softly. "She would tell me not to waste the chance you gave us." Claire's fingers curled weakly toward his. He reached out, covering her hand. The contact was fragile, tentative. But in that fragile moment, something shifted. Not a promise of romance, not yet, but the fragile birth of trust. That evening, Theo crept closer to the bed, hesitant. He had watched Ava cry with joy, watched Graham speak with quiet intensity to her mother. Now he carried his own fear like a stone in his chest. "Hi," he said awkwardly. "I'm Theo." Claire turned her head toward him, her smile faint but warm. "Theo, your mother was the bravest woman I ever met. She loved you so much." Theo blinked, startled. "You knew my mom?" Claire nodded slowly. "I held her hand when she thought she couldn't go on. She talked about you even then. She said she couldn't wait to meet her boy." Theo's throat tightened. He looked at his father, then at Ava, then back at Claire. Slowly he stepped closer. Placing his drawing, the stars and snowflakes he had sketched earlier, on the bedside table. "For you," he said quietly, "so you don't forget where you are. You're not alone." Claire's tears shone again. She reached for his hand, clasping it with surprising strength. "Thank you, Theo." And in that moment, the shadow of jealousy in his chest eased, replaced by something gentler, understanding. That night, as snow fell softly over Central Park, Graham stood by the window of the ICU. Behind him, Ava slept curled against her mother, Theo drowsing in a chair. Claire rested with her eyes closed, her hand still linked with both children. Graham whispered into the quiet, his voice low but resolute. "Julia, if you can hear me, I think this is what you wanted. For me to open my heart again. For me to say yes to life, even when it terrifies me." The city lights shimmered beyond the glass, blurred by falling snow. For the first time in years, the night did not feel like an enemy. It felt like a beginning. The following morning, the hospital's rhythms shifted from the stillness of night to the brisk current of day. Carts rattled down the halls, physicians made their rounds, and the ICU hummed with the overlapping voices of nurses updating charts. Inside Claire Reed's room, the monitors still kept their steady cadence, but the tension had eased. Claire was awake, weak but oriented. Ava clung to her side, refusing to leave even for breakfast. When the knock came, it was polite but firm. Daniel Ruiz, the social worker, entered with a leather folio tucked under his arm. He greeted Graham with the measured calm of someone trained to balance compassion and regulation. "Mr. Whitmore, Ms. Reed," he said, inclining his head. "I'll need a few minutes with both of you. It's time we formalize a safety plan." Claire stirred, her voice still husky from extubation. "Safety plan?" Ruiz pulled up a chair, settling across from her. "Yes. Whenever a parent is hospitalized without an immediate guardian available for the child, New York City's Administration for Children's Services, ACS, requires a plan. It ensures Ava's care is secure until you're discharged." Claire's lips tightened. "Her father—" She stopped, pain flickering across her face. "Her father died before she was born. There's no one else." The words landed heavy. Ava buried her face into her mother's side. Ruiz nodded gently. "I understand." That makes her legal status more fragile in the short term, but it also makes it straightforward. We only need one parent's authorization. You can designate a temporary caregiver. It doesn't transfer custody, it simply allows someone you trust to take Ava home, enroll her in school if needed, authorize medical treatment until you're able. Claire's eyes flickered to Graham, then back to Ruiz. "And if I don't sign?" Then ACS would place Ava in temporary foster care until you recover. The air grew cold at those words. Graham leaned forward, his voice quiet but unyielding. That won't happen. Ruiz's gaze settled on him. Mr. Whitmore, you've been present since the beginning. Are you willing to step forward formally as her interim caregiver? Yes. The answer came without hesitation. Ruiz withdrew a stack of forms. This is a voluntary safety plan. Ms. Reed, you'll authorize Mr. Whitmore as Ava's caregiver until you're medically cleared. He won't have custody, just the ability to make daily decisions in your place. You can revoke it at any time. Claire's hand trembled as she took the pen. Her gaze met Graham's, wary yet soft. Why would you do this? Graham's throat tightened. Because no child should wonder if she'll be alone at Christmas. Because Ava trusted me with her whisper when she was freezing in the snow. And because once, years ago, you held Julia's hand when she needed it most. It's my turn now. Claire's eyes filled with tears. She signed. Ruiz took the papers, sliding them into his folio. I'll file this immediately. Ava will remain with the Whitmores until discharge. We'll check in weekly. And a social work note will be placed in both of your charts. He stood, offering a faint smile. This is how the system is supposed to work, keeping children with safe adults, not strangers. That evening, Graham returned to the quiet room where Theo waited. The boy had sprawled on the cot, sketchbook open, crayons scattered. He looked up quickly. Well? Graham sat beside him, exhaling. It's official. Ava will be with us for a little while, until her mother is better. Theo's lips pressed tight. So she's moving in? For now, yes. But this doesn't change you and me, Theo. You're my son. That will never change. Theo stared at the drawing on his lap, two children holding hands beneath a crooked Christmas tree. He hesitated, then pushed it toward his father. If she's staying, she can share my room. Just don't let her touch my Legos. Graham chuckled softly, ruffling his son's hair. Deal. When Graham returned to Claire's room with the news, Ava leapt into his arms, relief breaking across her face like sunlight after a storm. I get to stay with you? With Theo? Yes, sweetheart. He hugged her tight. You'll be with us until your mommy is ready. We already talked to the hospital, and it's all written down. You'll be safe. Claire's eyes glistened. Thank you. I was so afraid she'd be taken. Graham shook his head. Not while I'm here. Claire reached for his hand, her grip weak but sure. Julia was right. People are the light when it's too dark. He squeezed back. And sometimes that light circles back when you least expect it. The next day, Kate Monroe, Graham's longtime attorney, arrived with a folder of her own. She was sharp-eyed, impeccably dressed, and carried the calm force of someone who could dismantle a corporate adversary in minutes. Graham, she said, setting the folder on the bedside table, I've reviewed the safety plan. It's solid, no gaps, but I recommend filing a caregiver authorization in civil court as well, belt and suspenders approach. It will reassure ACS that Ava is fully protected. She glanced at Claire. You'll remain Ava's legal guardian. This is only a stopgap. Claire nodded, her voice still rasping. Whatever keeps her safe. Kate smiled faintly. You're in good hands. Graham doesn't do things halfway. When she left, the room felt warmer, as though a protective net had been woven tight. That night, back at the townhouse on the Upper West Side, Theo surprised everyone. After dinner, he brought Ava upstairs and opening the door to his room with an exaggerated sigh. You can sleep here, he announced, but only on the bottom bunk. Top bunk is mine. Ava's eyes widened at the shelves of books, the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. She hugged the bear tighter, nodding solemnly. Okay, bottom bunk. Theo paused, then added gruffly, If you get scared, you can wake me up, but not too much. Ava smiled, her small voice soft. Thank you. Downstairs, Graham watched through the crack of the doorway, his heart aching in the best way. For the first time in years, his home rang with the sound of two children whispering before sleep. The following morning, as snow still fell lightly over Central Park, Graham sat with his coffee, papers spread before him. He glanced at the caregiver authorization. At the names written in careful ink, Claire Reed and Ava Reed. Their lives had crossed his by accident, or perhaps by providence. He thought of Julia's card, the faded ink that had survived years in a coat pocket. He thought of Ava's trembling voice in the snow, her faith that light could be found if only she followed it. And he thought of Theo, who had given up his bear and his bunk bed, quietly opening his heart again. This was more than a plan. It was the beginning of something he hadn't believed possible. A family built not by blood alone, but by choice, trust, and the fierce refusal to let anyone fall through the cracks. Snow drifted gently over the Upper West Side, frosting brownstones and townhouse stoops like sugar sifted by a patient hand. Inside the Whitmore home, the smell of cinnamon and gingerbread laced the air. A modest tree, nothing like the glittering spectacles of corporate lobbies Graham once presided over, stood in the corner of the living room, its branches dotted with mismatched ornaments. A paper star Theo had made in kindergarten, a glass snowflake Julia had bought at a Christmas market, and new creations from Ava's small hands. It had been a year since that night in the alley by Bryant Park, a year since Ava's fragile whisper had cracked open Graham's guarded heart. Now, as firelight warmed the room, the house no longer echoed with absence. It pulsed with presence. Theo, taller now by an inch, crouched by the tree, carefully placing a wrapped book beneath its boughs. He had insisted on writing his own dedication inside, though he had hidden the words from his father. His hair flopped into his eyes, and when Ava darted over, he pretended to shoo her away. "You'll ruin the surprise," he muttered. Ava giggled, her blonde hair bouncing. She had grown too, healthier, brighter, no longer the shivering figure Graham had lifted from the snow. Tonight she wore a red sweater 2 sizes too big, its sleeves folded at the wrists. She set her own gift beside Theo's, a lopsided box wrapped in newspaper comics. Graham leaned in the doorway, watching them with quiet wonder. He still carried Julia's absence, but the grief no longer hollowed him out. It had been woven into something larger, a tapestry where memory and new beginnings coexisted. Behind him, Claire stepped carefully into the room. She walked slower than before, her gait still slightly uneven from months of therapy, but her strength was undeniable. She had returned to part-time nursing at a local clinic, determined to keep her vocation alive while staying close to Ava. Her hair was shorter now, cut to her shoulders, but her eyes shone with the same steady warmth Graham remembered from the story Julia had told him. "You've turned this place into a gingerbread factory," she teased softly, sliding into the armchair by the fire. Graham smiled. "Theo insisted. He says gingerbread men are structurally superior to sugar cookies." Theo looked up indignantly. "It's true. They don't crumble as fast. It's basically engineering." Ava clapped her hands. "I made mine look like Daddy Graham, see?" She held up a cookie with lopsided icing, a crooked smile, and a sprinkle of gray sugar hair. Laughter filled the room, warm and unguarded. Later, after the last tray of cookies cooled, Theo brought a book from under the tree. He handed it to Ava with a shy grin. "It's our story," he said. "I drew it." Ava peeled away the wrapping. Inside was a handmade picture book, each page filled with crayon illustrations. One showed a man in a coat, lifting a small girl from the snow. Another showed two children sharing a teddy bear. The final page held a drawing of four figures standing under a Christmas tree: a father, a boy, a girl, and a mother. Above them, Theo had written in block letters, "Family is big enough for all of us." Ava's eyes brimmed with tears. She hugged the book to her chest, then threw her arms around Theo. "Thank you. This is the best present ever." Theo's face reddened, but he didn't pull away. Graham's throat tightened. He glanced at Claire, who was already wiping her eyes. Their gazes met, and in that moment, neither spoke, but both knew the depth of what had been built over the past year. After the children settled by the fire with mugs of cocoa, Ava curled up at Graham's side. She looked up at him with her steady brown eyes. "Can I call you Daddy Graham? Out loud? Even when Mommy's here?" The room went still. Claire shifted slightly in her chair, watching. Graham bent low, brushing a curl from Ava's forehead. His voice was gentle, steady. "Sweetheart, you can call me whatever feels right to your heart. You have a mommy who loves you more than anything. And you'll always have me, too." Ava's lips curved into a smile. "Then you're Daddy Graham forever." Claire's eyes glistened, but she nodded. "It's what she's felt all along. I think it's what I feel, too. You've been her father in every way that matters." Theo leaned forward, grinning despite himself. "Well, that makes us siblings now. But remember, you still can't touch my Legos." The room burst into laughter again, the kind that carried both healing and joy. Later that night, after the children drifted to sleep beneath the glow of the tree, Graham and Claire lingered by the fire. Silence stretched comfortably between them, broken only by the occasional crackle of wood. Claire traced the rim of her mug, her voice quiet. "I used to think everything ended that night in the subway. That Ava would lose me, that she'd be swallowed by the system. But somehow, it was the beginning." Graham nodded slowly. "I used to think everything ended the night Julia died, that nothing left could matter. But Ava proved me wrong. You proved me wrong." Claire looked at him, her eyes steady. "You carried me and my daughter when I couldn't. You gave us more than a home. You gave us a family. I'll never stop being grateful." Graham's voice lowered. "It wasn't charity. It was survival. For me, too. You and Ava gave me back the reason I thought I'd lost forever." For a long moment, they simply held each other's gaze, the air between them full of unspoken tenderness. Not a promise of easy futures, but of shared ones. Just before midnight, Ava stirred in her sleep, mumbling softly. Graham leaned over, catching the words. "Thank you for finding me in the snow." He brushed a kiss across her hair. "Thank you for letting me." Snow still fell outside, but inside the townhouse, warmth radiated like a living thing. Christmas, once a hollow echo of loss, had become something else, a living testimony that grief could give way to grace, and broken families could be stitched together not by chance, but by choice. The lobby of Mount Sinai West shimmered with winter light. Snow fell steadily outside, blanketing 10th Avenue, while inside cameras clicked softly as reporters gathered for a small press event. It wasn't the scale of a corporate launch or a Wall Street merger. It was quieter, humbler. But to Graham, Theo, Ava, and Claire, it meant more than any boardroom triumph ever could. The podium was draped with a simple banner, the Blue Gloves Fund. At its heart stood a framed photo, Julia Whitmore, smiling with Theo as a newborn in her arms, taken days after Claire had steadied her through labor. Beneath it, the weathered thank you card Julia had once written, the same card Graham had found in Claire's coat pocket, was displayed in glass. Graham adjusted the microphone, his voice deep and steady. 1 year ago, on Christmas Eve, I found a little girl shivering in the snow. She whispered one word, Mommy. And that word led me back here, to this hospital, to a nurse who had once saved my own family years before. Tonight, we're not here to tell a story about loss. We're here to tell a story about what happens when kindness circles back. He glanced at Claire, who sat in the front row with Ava on her lap and Theo at her side. Both children leaned forward, their eyes shining. Claire gave a small nod of encouragement, her hand brushing Ava's hair. The Blue Gloves Fund, Graham continued, will provide scholarships for single parents in nursing school, stipends for nurses who work double shifts to keep patients safe, and resources for families who find themselves stranded in moments of crisis. And today, we dedicate a new quiet room upstairs so children can sleep beside their parents when illness keeps families apart. Applause rippled through the room. For Graham, it wasn't about publicity, it was about legacy. Julia's gratitude, Claire's courage, Ava's whisper, Theo's forgiveness. They had all led here. After the speeches, Claire was invited to speak. She rose slowly, steady on her legs though her gait remained faintly uneven. The microphone trembled in her hand at first, but when she began, her voice carried with quiet conviction. A year ago, I was a Jane Doe, no name, no voice, unconscious in an ICU bed. I could have lost everything, but a stranger refused to walk away from my daughter. He carried her and me until we could stand again. She paused, her eyes glistening. As a nurse, I've held countless hands in fear. But that night proved something I already believed. Kindness never disappears. It travels, sometimes for years, only to return when you need it most. This fund isn't about me, or even my daughter. It's about every family who deserves that circle of care. Her voice broke slightly, but she smiled. And to Julia Whitmore, though I only knew her briefly, I thank you. You taught me that even in the hardest moments, words can plant seeds, and tonight, those seeds have become something larger than we imagined. The crowd rose in a standing ovation. Later, after the event, the four of them slipped into the new quiet room upstairs. It was painted in soft colors, with 2 fold-out beds, a bookshelf filled with picture books, and a window overlooking Central Park. On the wall hung a plaque, "The Lighted Way, for children seeking the light in the dark." Ava ran her fingers over the words. "That's what you told me, Daddy Graham," she whispered. "That people are the light." Graham bent to kiss the top of her head. "And you proved it true, sweetheart." Theo sprawled on one of the beds, grinning. "This is way better than when I had to nap in Dad's office during meetings." Claire lowered herself into the chair by the window, her eyes soft. "It's perfect. A place where no child has to feel like a visitor in their own parents' fight." They lingered there together, not in silence but in the gentle hum of belonging. That evening, back at the townhouse, the fire burned bright. Theo read aloud from his picture book, Ava curled against him with the bear in her lap. Claire rested on the couch, her head tilted against the cushion, listening. Graham stood at the mantel, gazing at the photo of Julia that still held its honored place. For years he had feared that moving forward meant leaving her behind, but now he understood. Julia wasn't gone. Her kindness had simply multiplied, carried forward in the lives of others. He turned to look at the 3 figures gathered around the fire. Ava's laughter chimed like bells. Theo's voice carried with strength. Claire's eyes met his, steady and grateful. The ache in his chest was still there, but softer now, no longer hollow. It had been filled with something new, not replacement, but renewal. Before bedtime, Ava tugged at his sleeve. "Can we go see the snow one more time?" Bundled in coats, they stepped onto the stoop. Central Park glowed across the avenue, lamplight shimmering on untouched drifts. Ava slipped her hand into his gloved one, Theo on the other side. Claire followed, her breath misting in the cold. "Remember when you found me here?" Ava whispered, pointing at the snow. "I'll never forget," Graham said. "It was the night everything changed." She leaned against him. "I wasn't scared anymore after you came, because you said families don't shrink, they grow." Theo, rolling his eyes but smiling, added, "And they get noisier." They all laughed, their voices carrying into the winter night. Back inside, as the fire dimmed, Claire whispered the words that would stay with them. "Loving someone doesn't take away what came before. It just makes more room for the future." And as snow continued to fall outside, covering the city in silence and light, the Whitmore and Reed families, now one, sat together in a circle of warmth that no storm could break. The legacy was no longer just in a fund or a plaque. It was in the way two children leaned against each other without fear, in the way a man learned to open his heart again, and in the way a mother woke to find her daughter safe in a stranger's arms. It was, finally, in the way kindness had gone out into the world and found its way back home. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this journey of snow, loss, and healing. If stories of kindness and second chances speak to your heart, we'd love for you to subscribe and be part of this family of hope.